The Horizon's Edge sensors detected an energy signature from a derelict ship older than recorded human history. Commander Vasquez ordered her crew to approach with extreme caution as the black hull shifted with unknown symbols. What they found inside would rewrite everything humanity knew about its place in the galaxy. The deep space sensors aboard the Horizon's Edge registered a ghost signal at maximum range. It pulsed from a sector marked empty on all charts, a void between star systems where nothing should exist. Commander Vasquez studied the readout, her expression neutral but her focus absolute. She had seen false echoes before, sensor ghosts from gravitational lensing or quantum distortion. But this signal held a steady rhythm. It felt deliberate. Helm reduced to 1/4 thrust. "Maintain current heading," Vasquez ordered, her voice calm but carrying through the quiet bridge. "Tactical full passive scan only. I want no active emissions from this ship." The risk was minimal this far out, but standard procedure existed for a reason. Unknown contacts in dead space rarely brought good news. The sensor operator shook his head, frustration evident in his tone. "Readings make no sense, Commander. The energy signature doesn't match any known power source. It's reading as both ancient and current, like it's been running continuously for millennia, but shows no decay. The spectral analysis flickered between impossible extremes, materials that should have degraded to dust still registering structural integrity, energy patterns that defied known physics. Around the bridge, the senior staff exchanged uneasy glances. The science officer advocated immediate investigation, citing the unprecedented scientific value. The security chief argued for caution, recommending they withdraw to a safe distance and report the find to Fleet Command. The debate was brief but tense, each officer laying out risks and rewards with professional precision. Vasquez listened to both sides, her eyes never leaving the main viewer where the distant speck grew steadily larger. "We proceed," she stated, cutting off the discussion. "But we do it smart. Weapon systems remain cold, shields at minimum for particle deflection only. I want full recording of every sensor reading from this point forward." Her decision carried the weight of command, the calculated risk of exploration against the unknown. As they closed the distance, the speck resolved into a distinct shape. It was a vessel, but its form broke every rule of ship design. There were no clear engine nacelles, no visible viewports or antenna arrays. The silhouette suggested a structure that had never known atmospheric entry, with angles that seemed to fold in on themselves in impossible geometries. It hung in the void like a sculpture never meant to be functional. Long-range scans began returning age estimates that made the science team question their instruments. The initial readings suggested a construction date predating human civilization by tens of thousands of years. Secondary scans confirmed it. The vessel's material composition showed atomic decay patterns consistent with extreme age, yet the energy signature continued to pulse with undiminished strength. "This isn't just old," the science officer murmured, his usual clinical detachment gone. "This is prehistoric. It was already ancient when the pyramids were built." The reality settled over the bridge crew. They were looking at something that shouldn't exist, a relic from a time before human history began. Vasquez made the final call without hesitation. "Prepare the boarding team. Full environmental suits, non-lethal weapons only. We're going in." Her order set in motion a sequence of events that would change everything, though none of them knew it yet. The airlock cycle began its countdown as the strange ship filled their view, silent and waiting. The Horizon's Edge positioned itself within 100 meters of the dark vessel. At close range, the blackness of its hull revealed itself as something far more than mere coloration. It absorbed light completely, showing no reflection, no highlights, no surface texture. Directing floodlights toward it produced no illumination effect. The light simply vanished into the surface without scattering or reflecting back. Standard sensor scans returned consistent error messages, their energy beams failing to penetrate even the outermost layer. The active imaging systems showed only a perfect void where the ship's surface should have been visible. Engineers ran the material through the Galactic composition database and found 0 matches. The substance defied classification, showing properties that contradicted known physical laws. One theory suggested a metamaterial engineered at the quantum level, its structure designed to cancel out specific energy wavelengths. Another proposed a form of matter locked in a perpetual quantum state, neither solid nor energy, but something in between. The chief engineer noted the material seemed to absorb and dissipate energy rather than reflect it, acting like a perfect sink for any radiation or particle that touched it. This absorption property became more apparent as they maintained position. The ship's hull showed a slight drop in local temperature readings, as if drawing ambient heat from the surrounding space. Energy readings from their own system showed minor fluctuations when pointed toward the derelict. The blackness wasn't a visual characteristic but a functional one, a surface that consumed energy rather than interacting with it. As the observation shuttle moved within 50 meters, the smooth black surface began to change. Patterns emerged like currents in dark water, flowing across the hull in intricate designs. The symbols appeared and dissolved too quickly for the cameras to capture clearly, moving with purpose rather than random motion. They resembled mathematical notation, circuit diagrams, and linguistic characters simultaneously, yet matched nothing in the ship's extensive database of known languages and codes. The linguistics team worked frantically to analyze the patterns, applying every decryption and translation algorithm available. Each attempt failed. The symbols followed no recognizable grammatical structure or symbolic logic. They moved with intelligent design, yet resisted all attempts at interpretation. Dr. Foster observed that the patterns seemed to react to their scans, shifting more rapidly when actively observed and slowing to near stillness when left alone. Standing at the observation window, Commander Vasquez felt an unsettling sensation she couldn't explain. The hull didn't just display symbols, it seemed to be watching them in return. The patterns shifted toward their shuttle, almost like recognition. The material itself appeared to have awareness, responding to their presence with what could only be described as attention. Every attempt to analyze it felt like being analyzed in return. It became clear they weren't looking at a ship's exterior, but at a protective barrier of unimaginable sophistication. This was no mere vessel carrying cargo or passengers. The energy signature they'd detected wasn't engines or systems. It was the hum of whatever intelligence governed this surface. They had found not a derelict but a vault, and its contents remained hidden behind a living, responsive material that guarded its secrets with silent determination. The question was no longer what this ship was, but what it was protecting, and why it needed such impossible defenses. The boarding team's shuttle extended its access arm, searching for any standard airlock or entry mechanism. They found nothing, no seams, no docking ports, no visible means of entry. The black surface remained seamless and unbroken, offering no way inside. Commander Vasquez authorized the use of cutting tools, starting with a standard laser torch rated for emergency hull breaches. The beam focused on a single point, its intense energy enough to slice through military-grade armor plating. The black surface absorbed the laser completely, showing no heating, no melting, no reaction whatsoever. The readouts showed energy dissipation at 100% efficiency, an impossible physical characteristic. They upgraded to a plasma torch, the kind used for decommissioning retired battlecruisers. The blue-white plasma stream should have vaporized any known material. Instead, it spread across the surface like water on glass, its energy bleeding away into the dark material without effect. The torch operator increased power to maximum output, risking equipment damage. The plasma flared brighter, but the hull continued to absorb everything, without showing even superficial damage. Temperature sensors registered no change at the contact point. The material wasn't just resistant, it was fundamentally immune to their technology. Frustration mounted as engineering teams proposed increasingly desperate solutions. Magnetic cutters, sonic disruptors, even shaped explosive charges were suggested and rejected as either too dangerous or likely ineffective. The team stood facing an impenetrable barrier, their advanced tools rendered useless. Vasquez ordered a pause in operations, considering whether to abort the mission entirely. The risk rebalance equation was shifting toward withdrawal. A junior technician monitoring the hull's shifting patterns noticed a change. Where the plasma torch had been applied, the flowing symbols began to cluster and slow their movement. They arranged themselves into concentric circles around the attempted entry point, forming what looked like a structured sequence. The technician reported the anomaly, pulling up the visual feed on the main display. The symbols stabilized into a fixed pattern, holding their formation unlike any previous behavior they'd observed. Dr. Foster studied the new configuration, her scientific curiosity overriding her caution. She noted the geometric precision of the arrangement, the mathematical elegance of the symbols. This wasn't defensive behavior, she realized, it was communication. The ship wasn't resisting them, it was waiting for a specific response. She proposed the theory to Vasquez. They weren't dealing with a lock to be broken, but a test to be passed. The vessel demanded proof of understanding before granting access. The science team worked quickly, analyzing the symbol pattern for mathematical constants or universal concepts. They settled on the value of pi, a fundamental mathematical ratio known to any spacefaring species. Using the shuttle's external comm array, they transmitted the sequence in its most basic digital form, repeating it on multiple frequencies. The transmission required no sophisticated encoding, just the raw numbers in their purest representation. The black hull responded immediately. The symbols flashed bright white, their light intense enough to momentarily overload the shuttle's cameras. Then they flowed outward from the point of transmission, moving aside like a curtain being drawn back. Where there had been solid material, an opening appeared without any physical movement of parts. The edges of the opening shimmered with energy, maintaining the discontinuity in the black surface. It wasn't a door, it was a temporary suspension of the material's natural state, a controlled breach that defied normal physics. The opening revealed a dark interior, no different in appearance from the exterior blackness. Scans showed atmosphere matching their own suit requirements, normal pressure and composition. The energy readings from inside were clean, showing no radiation or hazardous emissions. They had gained entry not through force but through knowledge. The ship had assessed their response and found it acceptable. Vasquez ordered the first team to proceed inside, their suit lights piercing the darkness beyond the threshold. They had passed the first test, but what waited inside remained completely unknown. The boarding team passed through the opening into absolute darkness. Their suit lights cut narrow beams through the void, revealing nothing but empty space extending beyond their range. Atmosphere readings showed none of the expected shipboard environments. No temperature control, no air circulation, no life support systems. The space felt more like an airless cavern than a functional vessel interior. They moved forward carefully, magnetic boots adhering to the same black material that comprised the exterior hull. As they advanced, the central chamber came into view. Their lights illuminated structures that rose from the darkness like geological formations. These were not mechanical components or navigation consoles, but immense crystalline growths reaching toward the unseen ceiling. The crystals stood in organized clusters, some towering 3 times human height, their facets catching the light with perfect geometric precision. Each one pulsed with a soft internal luminescence, a rhythmic glow that moved through the structures in waves. The humming they detected from outside grew more distinct inside the chamber. It wasn't mechanical vibration, but a resonant frequency that seemed to emanate from the crystals themselves. Energy readings spiked on their scanners, not as explosive power but as sustained output at levels that should have required massive reactor systems. The science team adjusted their instruments, trying to classify the energy type. It matched no known power signature, not plasma, not nuclear, not any conventional energy transmission. Dr. Foster directed her scanner toward the nearest crystal cluster. The arrangement showed mathematical perfection, each crystal positioned according to complex geometric patterns that repeated throughout the chamber. The formations followed Fibonacci sequences and golden ratios with exacting precision, suggesting intentional design rather than natural growth. Scans of individual crystals returned astonishing results. Each one showed atomic structure without flaws or irregularities. The lattice patterns were perfect down to the subatomic level, something impossible to achieve through natural crystallization processes. She reported her findings to Commander Vasquez, her voice calm but precise. These were not mined or found minerals, they were manufactured. The growth patterns showed controlled environmental conditions that could not occur naturally. Each crystal had been grown with intentional structure, its form following function in ways they couldn't yet understand. The manufacturing technology required to create such perfection exceeded anything in human capability. Analysis of the crystal composition brought more surprises. The material matched no known element or compound from Earth or any cataloged world. The atomic structure showed unfamiliar bonding patterns and electron configurations. Some elements registered as theoretical possibilities that had never been observed in nature or created in laboratories. The crystals represented materials science far beyond current understanding, substances engineered for specific purposes they could only guess at. The energy signature they had detected from outside resolved into its true nature. It wasn't power generation, but data transmission. Constant low-level information flow between the crystals. The pulsing light represented data packets moving through the network, information stored and transmitted through the crystalline structures. The hum was the background radiation of immense computational activity, like a server farm operating at scales beyond imagining. The crew stood surrounded by what they now understood was not an engine room or control center, but a storage system of unimaginable capacity. This was a library, but one that used crystalline structures instead of books, light instead of ink, quantum data storage instead of paper. The scale of information contained in the chamber was overwhelming. Each perfect crystal likely held more data than entire planetary archives. They had found a repository of knowledge, preserved for millennia in flawless crystalline form, waiting for someone to access its contents. Dr. Foster moved toward the central crystal cluster, her handheld scanner chiming with increasing urgency. The device's display flashed warnings as data streams overwhelmed its processing capacity. She adjusted the sensitivity settings, but the information flow only intensified, forcing her to shut down non-essential functions to prevent a complete system crash. The scanner registered energy patterns that defied its programming, data structures that followed no known encoding protocols. As she approached within 3 meters, the crystals responded to her presence. Their internal luminescence brightened from soft pulse to steady glow, illuminating the chamber with clear white light. The humming frequency shifted upward, becoming more pronounced but remaining at a level that felt comfortable to human hearing. The change wasn't threatening. It felt like activation, like a system coming online after long dormancy. The crystals nearest to her glowed brightest, their light patterns synchronizing across the cluster. A beam of coherent light emerged from the largest central crystal, projecting into the space before her. It formed a three-dimensional interface that hung in the air without visible support. The projection showed intricate symbols arranged in geometric patterns, rotating slowly as if waiting for interaction. The symbols used shapes and arrangements unfamiliar to any known written language, yet their organizational logic felt immediately comprehensible. The layout suggested categories and submenus, with larger central symbols surrounded by smaller related icons. Dr. Foster studied the interface, her training in xenolinguistics providing little help, yet her intuition guiding her understanding. She recognized a star symbol similar to those used in standard stellar cartography, positioned prominently among the options. Reaching toward the projection, she found her hand could interact with the light constructs despite their intangible nature. Selecting the star symbol caused it to brighten under her touch, the other symbols fading to background prominence. The projection shifted immediately, expanding to fill a larger volume of space before her. A detailed star map materialized, showing the Milky Way galaxy in astonishing detail. The scale was comprehensive, displaying not just major star systems but countless minor celestial bodies, nebulae, and gravitational anomalies. The map showed dynamic elements she'd never seen on any navigation chart. Flow patterns indicating ship routes, shaded regions marking political boundaries, and glowing lines connecting systems in complex networks. The galactic geography was completely wrong compared to modern charts. Familiar constellations appeared in different relative positions, suggesting either extreme age or alternate cosmic development. Trade routes connected systems currently known to have no contact with each other. Political boundaries enclosed regions that were now independent territories, while empty space on current maps showed dense concentrations of activity. The entire layout suggested a galactic civilization organized along completely different principles than the current political landscape. Humanity's region of space was clearly marked, centered on the Sol system, but it wasn't labeled as a recent expansion zone or developing territory. The designation showed extensive infrastructure networks, multiple FTL lanes converging on Earth, secondary hubs throughout nearby systems, and what appeared to be established trade routes extending in all directions. The map depicted human space not as a newcomer's frontier but as a long-established core region with deep connections throughout the Galaxy. The pathways and connections indicated continuous human presence for thousands of years. There were routes labeled with symbols that suggested regular traffic between Earth and systems humanity had only recently discovered. Orbital facilities around planets humans had never visited showed detailed schematics and capacity ratings. The map portrayed a human civilization that had been spacefaring for millennia, with infrastructure and influence spanning large portions of the galaxy. Every detail contradicted the known history of human expansion, which dated back only 2 centuries since the development of practical FTL travel. The implications settled over the team watching the display. They weren't looking at a future projection or theoretical model. The archive presented this as historical data. The star map showed a galaxy that had existed, with humanity as an established interstellar species at a time when recorded history showed humans barely mastering agriculture. The discontinuity between known history and the archive's information created a cognitive rupture that left them struggling to process what they were seeing. Dr. Foster's hands moved through the holographic interface. With growing confidence, her fingers tracing symbols that felt increasingly intuitive despite their alien appearance. The trembling in her hands came not from fear but from the sheer weight of what they were uncovering. Her scientific training fought against the impossible implications of each discovery, yet the evidence continued to present itself with undeniable clarity. She navigated through categories organized by some logic that seemed to understand how a human mind would seek information, moving from broad galactic overviews to specific system details. She found a section labeled with symbols that translated in her mind as species origin. The interface had adapted to her cognitive patterns, presenting information in ways she could comprehend without formal translation. Selecting the Sol system designation caused the star map to collapse into a focused view of their home system. The projection zoomed inward past Mars and Venus, settling on Earth as the primary subject. The planet filled the display space, rotating slowly with continents she recognized but details that were completely wrong. The familiar shapes of North America, Europe, and Asia appeared in their proper positions, but the surface details showed nothing from any historical record. Where there should have been natural landscapes and scattered cities, the entire landmass showed continuous urban development. The cities gleamed with metallic structures that rose in elegant spirals and geometric patterns, their architecture following principles unknown to modern human design. No roads connected them. Transportation appeared to occur through aerial networks or other means not visible from this scale. Multiple orbital rings encircled the planet at different altitudes, each one studded with structures that suggested habitation or industry. Between these rings moved a constant flow of spacecraft, their numbers dwarfing anything in current Earth orbit. The traffic patterns showed organization and purpose, with ships moving in coordinated streams between orbital facilities and surface locations. The scale of activity suggested a population and technological level far beyond present-day capabilities. The planetary surface showed no signs of environmental damage that characterized human history. The atmosphere appeared completely clear, without the haze of pollution or industrial emissions that had marked Earth's development. Ocean surfaces showed vibrant blue coloration, without the plastic accumulation or chemical contamination that modern surveys documented. Polar ice caps appeared at full extension, showing none of the retreat that current climate models predicted. This was an Earth that had either avoided ecological crises entirely or solved them completely. The projection displayed a world that had achieved perfect balance between technological advancement and environmental stability. Urban areas blended with green spaces in patterns that suggested intentional design rather than sprawling development. Energy signatures showed clean power generation without waste products or radiation leaks. The entire planet functioned as an integrated system where human civilization existed in harmony with its environment. A utopian achievement that current humanity had only theorized as possible futures. Below the planetary image appeared a designation that translated as Architect Designate Prime. The term carried connotations of creation and foundation rather than mere habitation. There was no date stamp or temporal marker, only this epoch designation that placed Earth's status within some larger classification system. The absence of dates suggested this wasn't a historical period, but a functional designation that might still be current in whatever system maintained this archive. The crew stood in silence, their individual reactions hidden behind helmet visors, but their collective stillness speaking volumes. Each member confronted the cognitive dissonance of seeing their homeworld portrayed as something completely alien, yet strangely familiar. This wasn't alternate history or speculative fiction. The archive presented this as factual data, as reality. They were looking at Earth as it supposedly was or should have been, according to records that predated human civilization as they knew it. The contradiction between this vision and the Earth they had left behind created a silent tension in the chamber, each person grappling with the implications privately before they would need to discuss them as a team. Captain Brooke stepped forward, his command presence immediately shifting the team's focus. He motioned Dr. Foster aside gently but firmly, his eyes already scanning the interface with tactical assessment. His training prioritized information gathering over awe. Every second counted when dealing with unknown systems. His hands moved to the projection, his movements deliberate and efficient as he navigated away from the planetary display back to the main menu structure. The system responded to his touch without resistance, the symbols shifting to accommodate his commands. He searched for a primary index or root directory, the equivalent of a ship's main computer core access. The interface presented a three-tier organizational system that appeared to catalog the entire archive's contents. The first tier sorted information by contributing species, listing thousands of civilizations with familiar and unknown names. The second tier organized by technology type, with categories spanning energy systems, biological engineering, and spatial manipulation. The third tier used historical epochs marked by symbols rather than dates, suggesting a timeline that didn't correspond to human chronological systems. Brooks input search parameters for human-related data, using every identifier he could think of. He entered humanity first, then Terra, then Sol system as secondary terms. The system processed each query instantly, returning results that made his professional composure falter momentarily. Instead of the handful of entries he expected, perhaps some early contact records or observational data, the interface displayed thousands of results. The list scrolled into virtual infinity, each entry marked with the same clear designation that linked back to humanity. The timeline of entries showed creation dates that defied comprehension. The earliest records predated any human historical records by tens of thousands of years. There were entries from periods when humans were supposedly hunter-gatherers, from ages before writing systems developed, from eras that shouldn't have left any technological traces. Each entry carried precise temporal markers that placed human activity in deep time, contradicting everything known about human development and expansion. He scanned the classification system for humanity's status within the galactic community. The archive didn't list humans under client species or developing civilizations, or even emerging intelligence. Those categories contained hundreds of other species at various stages of development, but humanity appeared in a separate classification entirely. The designation appeared consistently across all relevant entries, marked with symbols that translated unmistakably as architects. Selecting this designation revealed linked references to fundamental technologies that underpinned galactic civilization. The listings included FTL Yuan, the foundational principles behind faster-than-light travel that every species used but none fully understood. Energy manipulation technologies that allowed power generation from vacuum states and zero-point energy. Artificial intelligence core code that formed the basis of all modern computational systems. These weren't human inventions in the current timeline, they were technologies humanity had supposedly contributed to the galactic community in some distant past. The connections formed a clear and devastating picture. Humanity wasn't a recent addition to the galactic stage, not a species that had lucked into FTL technology and expanded rapidly. They were originators, creators of the very systems that allowed interstellar civilization to exist. The archive showed them as foundational contributors to technologies that others had adopted and built upon. Their role wasn't participant but progenitor, not novice but master builder. This recontextualized everything about human history and their place in the galaxy. The 2 centuries of space exploration became not an initial expansion, but a return to realms they had once known. The technologies they used daily were not original creations but rediscoveries of their own legacy. The other galactic powers weren't dealing with an upstart species, but with the return of founders they may have believed gone forever. The weight of this realization settled over the team, changing their understanding of their mission, their species, and their very identity in ways they were only beginning to comprehend. The team stood motionless before the crystalline interface, the glowing projection casting sharp shadows across their helmets. Each member struggled privately with the cognitive dissonance created by the archive's revelations. The information presented a reality that contradicted their fundamental understanding of human history and capability. Commander Vasquez broke the silence, her voice calm but carrying an edge of something none of them had ever heard from her before: genuine uncertainty. "Our recorded history only goes back a few thousand years," she stated, not as challenge but as simple fact. "Everything before that is fragments and archaeology." "How does that align with this?" The archive showed a species that had achieved interstellar travel and galactic-scale engineering, while human civilizations on Earth were supposedly in their earliest developmental stages. It presented a technological capability that should have left physical evidence across the solar system, yet no such evidence existed in any survey or excavation. The two truths seemed mutually exclusive. A species could not be simultaneously primitive and architect, could not be mastering quantum physics while still developing basic agriculture. Dr. Foster studied the interface, her scientific mind wrestling with the paradox. She proposed the theory of a collapse, a dark age severe enough to erase all memory of this advanced past. She cited historical examples of lost knowledge: the burning of the Library of Alexandria, the destruction of Mayan codices, the multiple times human civilizations had forgotten their own achievements. But those were limited losses, recoverable through archaeology and scholarship. This was different. The scale of forgetting was absolute. Not a single legend, not a scrap of advanced technology, not a geological trace of the orbital infrastructure shown in the archive remained in human knowledge or the physical record. This suggested something beyond natural decline or gradual forgetting. The loss appeared systematic, complete, and intentional. The technology gap alone argued against simple collapse. The archive showed capabilities orders of magnitude beyond current human technology, suggesting advancement that would have taken millennia to achieve and should have left some residual evidence. This pointed toward a sudden and catastrophic reset rather than slow decline. The archive depicted a civilization that hadn't faded away, but had been deliberately returned to primitive conditions. The technological difference was too extreme for natural regression. It suggested an intentional reduction, a controlled demolition of civilization rather than its gradual failure. The crew began to understand they weren't looking at a history that had simply been forgotten, but one that had been actively erased. They realized their entire known history was merely a postscript to a much larger story that had already concluded. The rise of civilizations, the development of technology, the expansion into space, all of it was a second attempt, a rebuilding after some unimaginable event had reset their species to zero. They were living in the aftermath of their own greatest achievements and greatest failures, reenacting a development path their ancestors had already completed millennia before. The weight of being descendants rather than pioneers settled over them, changing their understanding of human potential and limitation in ways that would take years to fully process. Each team member now saw their personal history and identity through this new lens. Their education, their achievements, their understanding of human capability, all existed within constraints set by some forgotten decision made long before recorded history began. They were inheritors of a legacy they couldn't remember, bound by limitations they didn't understand, traveling paths their ancestors had already walked to destinations they couldn't yet imagine. The quiet hum of the crystalline archive seemed to underscore their realization, a constant reminder that they were latecomers to their own story. Captain Brooks returned to the stellar cartography display, his focus shifting from historical revelation to current practical application. He called up the archive's master star map again, its ancient trade routes and political boundaries glowing in the holographic space before him. With precise commands, he overlaid the modern galactic political borders onto the ancient schematic. The two maps didn't align at first, showing centuries of political shifts and territorial changes. But as he adjusted the parameters, A disturbing pattern began to emerge around human-controlled space. The boundary appeared as a perfect sphere centered on Earth, extending approximately 200 light-years in all directions. This spherical border didn't correspond to any natural phenomenon or political agreement. It cut through star systems, bisected nebula regions, and ignored all known gravitational or spatial considerations. The precision was mathematical rather than practical, a deliberate demarcation that showed intentional design rather than organic development. Along this artificial boundary, the map displayed regularly spaced pulsing red icons that glowed with urgent intensity. Brooks selected one of the red icons near the edge of human-explored space. The interface responded immediately, flashing a warning message in the same clear symbolic script that had characterized all the archive's communications. The translation came through their systems with chilling clarity, the words appearing on secondary displays for the whole team to see. Quarantine zone. Species under observation. Extreme caution advised. The message included additional technical data about containment protocols and monitoring systems that were currently active. The temporal markers on the warning showed it wasn't historical data. The quarantine designation carried a Shusha timestamp that matched their current date, with update markers indicating recent modifications to the monitoring parameters. This wasn't an ancient record. It was a current status report maintained by whatever system managed the archive. The quarantine wasn't something from humanity's past. It was an ongoing condition that was being actively maintained and monitored. The implications settled over the team with cold certainty. Other galactic powers hadn't merely known about humanity's true history. They had been actively containing them for reasons the archive didn't explain. The Hegemony Council, the Viridian Concord, the other major spacefaring civilizations, they all operated with knowledge that humanity remained ignorant of. Every diplomatic interaction, every trade agreement, every cultural exchange had occurred within this framework of containment and observation. Humanity's 2 centuries of space exploration hadn't been a triumphant expansion but movement within carefully defined limits. Their ships had never encountered the true edge of explored space because they'd been operating inside a cage with invisible walls. Every first contact, every discovery of a new species had been managed encounters with wardens who understood the true nature of the situation. The freedom they thought they'd achieved was an illusion maintained by powers that saw them as something to be contained rather than equals. The discovery transformed from historical curiosity to immediate crisis. This wasn't just about rewriting history books, it was about current galactic politics and humanity's place within them. The quarantine suggested that other species saw humanity as dangerous or unstable, requiring containment despite their current technological level. The reasons for this assessment remained hidden in portions of the archive they hadn't yet accessed. But the fact of the containment was undeniable and current. Vasquez immediately understood the operational implications. Their presence here, their access to this archive likely violated whatever agreements or protocols governed the quarantine. The other powers would be monitoring for exactly this kind of breakthrough, this level of awareness developing within the contained species. Their mission had just shifted from exploration to survival, from discovery to potential conflict with powers that had been manipulating human development for centuries. The comfortable narrative of human expansion shattered completely. They weren't pioneers exploring a welcoming galaxy, but prisoners testing the boundaries of their confinement. Every aspect of interstellar relations required re-evaluation in light of this fundamental deception. The trust they'd placed in their interstellar neighbors, the agreements they'd signed, the alliances they'd formed, all of it existed within a framework of containment that the other parties understood, but humanity did not. The team stood in silence, the hum of the crystalline archive the only sound in the chamber. Each member processed the same chilling realization. They had just discovered that their entire species lived in a carefully maintained zoo, watched by keepers who understood their true nature better than they did themselves. The freedom of space they cherished was an illusion, and they had potentially just triggered whatever mechanisms existed to maintain that illusion by force. The Horizon's Edge's comms officer registered the transmission as it broke through standard encryption protocols. A burst of tight beam communication sliced through normal space traffic, carrying authority codes that demanded immediate attention. The signal originated from multiple sources converging on their position, moving at speeds that indicated military-grade propulsion systems. The officer's console flashed with priority alerts as the system automatically categorized and translated the incoming messages. Sensor. Arrays tracked 7 separate contacts approaching from different vectors. Their velocity profiles showed rapid deceleration from FTL travel, dropping into normal space with precision timing that spoke of coordinated maneuver planning. The ships maintained formation despite their high-speed approach, holding tactical positions that covered all possible escape routes. Their approach pattern suggested thorough understanding of the derelict's location and the horizon's edge's position relative to it. Transponder signals identified the newcomers as Hegemony Council enforcement vessels. The identification codes carried the highest verification levels, confirming they represented one of the major galactic powers. Their ship classes matched known hegemony patrol and interdiction units, heavily armed vessels designed for compliance operations rather than exploration. The Council maintained these ships specifically for border security and treaty enforcement throughout their territory. The messages contained no standard hailing protocols or diplomatic greetings. They transmitted terse commands formatted as executable orders rather than requests. The text scroll showed direct instructions to power down engines, lower shields, and prepare for immediate boarding and inspection. The language used enforcement terminology that permitted no negotiation or delay. Compliance was expected within specific time parameters measured in minutes, rather than allowing for discussion. The timing of their arrival confirmed the crew's worst suspicions. The Hegemony ships hadn't detected the derelict through normal scanning. They arrived precisely when the archive interface was activated. Their response time indicated they'd been waiting for this event, positioned at standby locations ready to move when triggered. This wasn't investigation. It was containment protocol activation, responding to a breach they'd been monitoring for. The nature of their approach showed clear intent. Weapon systems on the approaching vessels powered to active status, targeting sensors locking onto the horizon's edge. Boarding craft detached from motherships, moving into position for rapid deployment. The Hegemony forces operated with practiced efficiency, executing procedures they'd clearly rehearsed for this specific scenario. Their objective was seizure and control, not discovery or dialogue. Commander Vasquez's priorities shifted instantly. The scientific mission ended as tactical considerations took precedence. Her crew's safety became the primary concern, followed by preservation of their discovery. The choice presented itself with brutal clarity: comply with the boarding order and lose all evidence of humanity's true history, or resist and potentially trigger interstellar conflict with a major galactic power. Neither option offered clean solutions. She made her decision without hesitation. Science team, begin emergency data extraction. Prioritize core archives and quarantine documentation. Engineering, prepare for emergency separation from the derelict. Tactical, shields to maximum, weapons remain offline unless fired upon. Her commands cut through the tension on the bridge, directing each department toward specific actions. The time for contemplation had ended. Now they operated on procedure and instinct. The science team accessed the crystalline interface, establishing multiple data streams to their ship's storage systems. The archive's information density overwhelmed their transfer capabilities immediately, forcing them to make brutal prioritization decisions. They focused on the quarantine protocols, species profiles, and technological principles that seemed most critical. Every second counted as the download progress bars inched forward with agonizing slowness. Outside the derelict, the Hegemony vessels completed their encirclement. Their boarding craft moved into final approach vectors, their docking systems extending toward the horizon's edge. The race was underway. Humanity's chance to reclaim its past depended on seconds and megabytes, with jailers arriving to ensure the truth remained buried. The science team established a hardline connection between their portable terminals and the crystalline interface. Fiber optic cables snapped into data ports that weren't designed for them, forcing engineers to improvise adapters on the spot. The archive's data stream proved orders of magnitude denser than anything they'd encountered, overwhelming buffer systems almost immediately. Storage drives flashed warnings as their capacity filled within seconds, forcing the team to implement aggressive compression, algorithms that sacrificed fidelity for sheer volume. They faced an impossible selection process with limited time and incomplete understanding. Dr. Foster focused her team on species profiles and core technological principles, the foundational knowledge that could help humanity understand its true capabilities. She prioritized files showing energy manipulation techniques and AI development paths, the technologies that seemed most critical to reclaiming their legacy. Each selection meant leaving behind thousands of other files, choosing fragments of truth from an ocean of information. Captain Brooks took control of the stellar cartography download, targeting the quarantine boundary data specifically. He isolated files showing monitoring station locations, enforcement protocols, and historical breach responses. These were immediate tactical concerns that Earth Command would need to understand the current threat environment. The spatial coordinates of the containment field took priority over historical records. Knowing where the cage ended mattered more than understanding how it was built. The data transfer progressed with agonizing slowness despite their maximum bandwidth allocation. Progress bars crept forward at fractions of a percent per second, the system struggling to process information densities that defied their architecture. Each megabyte represented centuries of lost knowledge, but the total archive measured in exabytes beyond their capacity to store. They were trying to drink from a fire hose with a thimble, capturing droplets from a torrent of information. External sensors showed the hegemony ships completing their tactical encirclement. Weapon systems powered to full combat readiness, targeting lasers painting the horizon's edge's hull at multiple critical points. Boarding craft moved into final approach vectors, their docking mechanisms extending toward the human ship. The lead hegemony vessel transmitted a final warning, giving them 60 seconds to comply with boarding procedures before they would use force. Inside the derelict, the environment began changing in response to the external threat. The constant humming from the crystalline structures intensified, rising in both pitch and volume until it vibrated through their suit systems. The shifting symbols on the walls and ceiling flashed from their usual soft glow to urgent red patterns that pulsed in sync with the rising hum. Clear warning indicators appeared on the holographic interface, showing security protocols activating throughout the archive system. The science team worked faster, their movements becoming desperate as they recognized the escalating situation. They initiated emergency compression routines that discarded 90% of each file's data to save only the core information. The quality loss was severe but necessary. Better to have fragmented truths than complete ignorance. Captain Brooks monitored both the download progress and the external threat display, calculating time margins that were shrinking too quickly. The lead hegemony boarding craft made contact with the horizon's edge's hull, magnetic clamps engaging with heavy thuds that reverberated through the structure. Internal sensors showed intrusion points being established at 3 separate locations. The archive's warning signals intensified, with some crystalline structures beginning to dim their internal illumination, as if preparing for shutdown or self-protection protocols. They had reached the absolute limit of their time window. Continuing the download risked the hegemony boarding parties capturing both the data and the source. Dr. Foster made the final call, terminating all data streams and initiating emergency disconnect procedures. The team pulled their connection cables as the archive began sealing itself, the temporary opening in the black hull starting to contract around them. They had captured fragments of the truth. Now they had to escape with them intact. Dr. Foster's fingers flew across the interface in the final seconds before disconnect. She bypassed complex directory trees and went straight for root-level files, searching for anything labeled as a summary or directive. Her scanner highlighted one entry that pulsed with higher priority than the others, marked with symbols that translated as Legacy Directive. She selected it without hesitation, knowing this might be their last meaningful download from the archive. The file opened not as data packets but as a formatted message designed for direct comprehension. The text appeared in clear, unadorned language that felt immediately human in its construction. It carried no alien syntax or unfamiliar phrasing. This was a message from the architects to their descendants. The directive explained fundamental principles of cosmic civilization that the architects had discovered through millennia of observation and experience. It described how all advanced species eventually face the same crisis point where technological power outpaces wisdom, where capability exceeds responsibility. This imbalance consistently led to self-destruction or stagnation across countless civilizations. Throughout galactic history, the architects had recognized this pattern in their own development and made a conscious choice to break the cycle. Instead of continuing their expansion and risking the hubris that destroyed others, they implemented a controlled reset of their own civilization. They chose to forget their achievements and technological mastery, to return to a simpler state where they could develop wisdom alongside capability. This wasn't a collapse or defeat, it was a strategic retreat from advancement until the species could mature emotionally and ethically to match its technical prowess. The quarantine boundary around human space was revealed as a protective measure, requested by the architects themselves. They had negotiated with other galactic powers to establish a containment field that would prevent humanity from expanding too quickly upon rediscovering space travel. The agreement included monitoring systems to ensure humanity developed at a sustainable pace, avoiding the mistakes that had doomed other species. The other civilizations weren't jailers but partners in a protective custody arrangement, honoring the architects' request to safeguard their descendants from their own potential for destruction. The legacy they left behind wasn't about reclaiming dominance or restarting an empire. The message emphasized responsibility over power, wisdom over capability. The true test of a civilization wasn't what it could build, but what it chose not to build, what power it could access but chose to leave unused. The architects had locked away their most dangerous technologies not because they couldn't control them, but because they understood the temptation to use them would be too great for a species still developing ethical maturity. The derelict ship served as one of many alarm clocks placed throughout the galaxy, set to activate when certain conditions were met. These conditions included humanity reaching a specific level of technological development and the galactic community achieving sufficient stability to assist rather than exploit their awakening. The ship wasn't a tomb containing dead knowledge, but a living system, waiting to deliver its message at the appropriate time. Its activation meant the conditions had been met. Humanity was ready to begin remembering, and the galaxy was prepared to accept their return. The timing of this awakening was now, triggered by their access of the archive. The process couldn't be stopped once initiated. The information would continue to propagate through designated channels regardless of attempts to contain it. The directive ended with a simple statement that the great forgetting had served its purpose, and the time for remembering had arrived. Humanity stood at the threshold of reclaiming, not just its history but its responsibility, to use that knowledge wisely. The final data packet completed, its transfer as heavy footsteps echoed through the derelict's corridors. The first hegemony boarding party rounded the corner into the crystalline chamber, their weapons raised and armor reflecting the pulsing red emergency lights. Dr. Foster severed the data connection, the cables retracting into her equipment as the archive's interface dimmed. The hegemony team leader barked orders in their native language, demanding immediate surrender. The Horizon's Edge team raised their hands slowly, the weight of what they'd just learned hanging between them like unspoken truth. They had captured humanity's legacy. Now they had to survive long enough to deliver it. The Horizon's Edge disengaged from the derelict with quiet urgency, its thrusters firing in precise bursts to achieve separation without aggressive movement that might provoke the surrounding hegemony vessels. The ship's data core ran at maximum capacity, its cooling systems straining under the processing load of the forbidden knowledge they had extracted. Every storage module and backup system contained fragments of information that contradicted centuries of accepted history, each byte carrying implications that could reshape humanity's future. The core temperature readings flashed cautionary alerts as the systems worked to stabilize the unprecedented data density now housed within their architecture. The hegemony ships maintained their positions, focusing their attention on securing the derelict rather than pursuing the retreating human vessel. Their boarding parties could be seen through external cameras entering the black hull, their movements methodical and practiced as they established control over the ancient ship. Sensor scans showed the hegemony vessels activating containment fields around the derelict, creating overlapping energy barriers that would prevent any further unauthorized access. Their priority clearly remained the quarantine of the archive rather than the interception of the Horizon's Edge, at least for the moment. The senior crew gathered in the briefing room, their faces illuminated by the main display showing the extracted data. The information appeared in carefully organized segments, stellar maps with quarantine boundaries highlighted in red, species profiles showing humanity's true classification, technological schematics that defied current understanding. Each file represented a piece of the puzzle they had assembled, a coherent picture emerging from the fragments they had managed to capture. During their frantic download operation, they now possessed absolute proof that humanity's history extended back tens of thousands of years beyond recorded memory. The evidence showed their species as founders of galactic civilization, rather than recent participants, as architects of technologies that others had inherited and built upon. This truth had the potential to shatter the current galactic political structure, challenging the authority of powers that had positioned themselves as overseeing humanity's development. The status quo existed because humanity believed itself a newcomer. That illusion could not survive contact with this evidence. This knowledge represented both opportunity and threat in equal measure. Properly handled, it could provide humanity with the keys to reclaim its legacy and advance beyond current technological limitations. It offered understanding of fundamental physics that could solve energy crises, medical challenges, and spatial travel limitations that had constrained human expansion for centuries. But the same information could be weaponized, turned against other species, or used to destabilize galactic governments that had operated under false assumptions about human capabilities and history. The immediate choice presented two dangerous paths. Revealing the truth would likely trigger widespread panic and opportunistic aggression from powers seeking to control or suppress the architect legacy. Every major government and corporation would scramble to seize whatever fragments of knowledge they could obtain, potentially igniting conflicts over technology that no one fully understood. The careful diplomatic balances that had maintained peace for centuries would collapse under the weight of this revelation. Keeping the knowledge hidden meant condemning humanity to continued existence as a controlled species, living within boundaries set by others who understood their true nature better than they did themselves. It meant accepting the quarantine as permanent, abandoning any claim to their heritage, and proceeding with development under the watchful eyes of wardens who saw them as potentially dangerous children rather than equals. The prison would remain, but now they would know they were in it. Commander Vasquez studied the faces of her crew, reading the tension in their expressions and the weight of understanding in their eyes. Each person recognized the magnitude of the decision before them, the consequences that would ripple across human civilization for generations, regardless of which path they chose. There were no safe options, only calculated risks with potentially catastrophic outcomes on both sides. The responsibility for choosing rest entirely with her. The weight of command now expanded to include the future direction of their entire species. She looked from her crew to the data display, then to the tactical readout showing the hegemony ships maintaining their position around the derelict. Their window for decision was closing. Once the hegemony secured the archive, they would turn their attention to the horizon's edge and the knowledge it carried. The choice had to be made now, without consultation with Earth Command, without extended analysis of the potential consequences. Navigation, she said, her voice calm but carrying absolute authority through the quiet room. Set course for Earth. Maximum FTL jump on my mark. Her order set their direction. They would carry the truth home and let humanity decide collectively what to do with it. The navigation officer acknowledged the command, his hands moving across the console with practiced efficiency as he calculated the jump coordinates. The ship's engines began building power for the transition to faster-than-light travel, the hum rising through the deck plates as they prepared to leave normal space behind. The horizon's edge dropped out of FTL within the boundaries of Earth's defensive perimeter, the familiar blue and white marble of home filling the main viewer, but the sight brought no comfort, only a profound and unsettling shift in perspective. The stars surrounding them no longer shone as distant, anonymous points of light. They now appeared as landmarks on a chart they had only just been permitted to read. Each system they passed, each navigational beacon, felt like a place they should know intimately, a part of their history that had been forcibly forgotten. The crew moved through their duties with a new silence, their eyes frequently drifting to the viewports as if seeing the galaxy for the first time. They immediately initiated a compressed data burst transmission to Earth Command, using the highest-level encryption protocols reserved for existential threats or first contact scenarios. The signal contained curated fragments of their discovery, the quarantine boundary coordinates, the species designation as architects, and select technological schematics. The transmission was a calculated risk, sending enough evidence to be credible but not enough to be catastrophic if intercepted. They received the standard automated acknowledgement of receipt, then nothing but dead air for 17 agonizing minutes. The silence broke with a flurry of encrypted priority messages from multiple command centers. The initial responses were terse requests for verification, demanding confirmation codes and mission logs. These were quickly followed by increasingly frantic communications from different factions within Earth's government and military structure. The messages contradicted each other, some ordering immediate quarantine of the ship, others demanding a full data dump, a few questioning the crew's mental state and sensor calibration. The unified command structure had fractured under the weight of the information. Chaos erupted across the political and scientific establishments. Emergency sessions convened in every major government and research body. Scientific committees that had reviewed the data first argued the findings were an elaborate hoax, then fell into disbelief as verification checks confirmed the data's internal consistency and impossible age. Political leaders faced immediate division, with factions forming along ideological lines. Some demanded immediate public disclosure, arguing humanity had a right to know its true history. Others called for absolute secrecy, fearing the societal collapse and galactic retaliation that could follow. The debate was not academic. It was a struggle for control of a truth that changed everything. The crew of the Horizon's Edge found themselves in an impossible position. They were hailed as pioneering heroes by some factions for making the discovery of the millennium. Simultaneously, they were treated as dangerous pariahs by others for uncovering a truth that threatened the established order. Their personal communications were monitored, their movements restricted even after docking at the orbital station. They were celebrated and condemned in the same breath, bearers of a knowledge that nobody had actually wanted to receive. They were immediately placed under intensive debriefing by overlapping and competing security agencies. The questioning lasted for days, repeating the same details, probing for inconsistencies, searching for any hint of fabrication or external manipulation. The process was less about understanding their findings and more about assessing the threat they represented. After the debriefings concluded, the entire crew was remanded to protective custody under the guise of medical quarantine and psychological evaluation. Their living quarters were comfortable but secure, with limited communication and constant observation. The knowledge they brought back was contained within a digital vault, accessible only to a select committee through multi-layered encryption and biometric locks. It was studied in fragments, analyzed by teams who signed lifetime confidentiality agreements. But the truth was already out, a seed planted in the consciousness of those who had seen it. Information of this magnitude could not be undiscovered or forgotten. It began to influence decisions and theories even in its contained state, its implications seeping into strategic planning and scientific research. Humanity's quiet corner of the galaxy, long considered a backwater by other species and a safe home by its inhabitants, would not remain quiet for long. The Horizon's Edge had broken a silence that had lasted for millennia. The return of the architects, even just as an idea, had already begun to change the political calculus of every government on Earth and would soon ripple outward to the stars. The fragile peace of ignorance was over. Whispers emerged first in secured scientific forums, circulating through encrypted channels among astrophysicists and xenohistorians. The initial rumors described an impossible discovery at the galaxy's edge, a ship older than civilization itself. These discussions remained contained within academic circles for weeks, treated as speculative theories or potential hoaxes. Then fragments migrated to public networks, appearing in restricted discussion groups and classified data exchanges. The story gained traction slowly. Initially dismissed as another space myth or elaborate fabrication designed to attract attention, the narrative shifted when the Hegemony Council released an official statement through diplomatic channels. Their communication acknowledged the existence of an anomalous vessel in neutral territory, confirming its discovery and subsequent securing by their forces. The statement was deliberately vague, describing the object as an archaeological curiosity of unknown origin. They explicitly denied any knowledge of the ship's contents or purpose, framing it as a mysterious artifact they were studying for the benefit of galactic science. This careful wording avoided direct lies while concealing the truth. They clearly understood. This official confirmation sent immediate shockwaves through every government and corporate entity with interstellar interests. The initial rumors transformed into validated fact with the Council's admission. Emergency meetings convened across the galaxy as powers large and small attempted to assess the implications. Intelligence agencies redirected resources to investigate the discovery, while corporate entities considered the commercial and strategic possibilities. The galaxy shifted from casual interest to intense focus on one mysterious ship and its contents. Every significant human achievement underwent immediate re-evaluation in light of the discovery. Technological breakthroughs that had been celebrated as human ingenuity were now scrutinized for possible connections to this ancient past. Scientific publications were reread for patterns that might indicate deeper knowledge emerging unconsciously. Historical records were examined for gaps or inconsistencies that could suggest manipulation or missing chapters. The foundation of human identity as a young, rapidly advancing species was now in question. The nature of human innovation became a subject of intense debate. Were their technological leaps the product of genius and hard work? Or were they accessing genetic memory from a forgotten past? Was each breakthrough genuine innovation, or were they remembering technologies their ancestors had already mastered? This questioning extended to individual inventors and scientists, who now faced skepticism about whether their work was truly original or merely recollection. The psychological impact spread through academic and research communities, creating crises of confidence among those who had built their careers on supposed innovation. The quarantine zone around human space transformed from a little-noticed jurisdictional boundary to the most watched region in the galaxy. Every government and news organization directed sensors and telescopes toward the perimeter, monitoring for any activity or changes. The boundary lines that had been simple political markings on star charts now represented something far more significant: the edges of a cage whose purpose was suddenly under examination. The zone became a subject of intense study and speculation, its every detail analyzed for clues about its true nature. The first human ships to approach the boundary after the discovery were merchant vessels and exploration probes on routine missions. Hegemony patrols intercepted them with unusual aggression, turning them back with stern warnings and reinforced patrol patterns. The encounters were documented and analyzed by observers across known space, providing clear evidence that the quarantine remained actively enforced despite the revelations. These incidents demonstrated that the political reality had not changed, even as the historical understanding had been completely transformed. A new tension settled over human hegemony relations, different from previous diplomatic friction. This was not the typical tension between competing powers, but the unease of a prisoner and jailer who have both discovered the prison's true nature. Communications became more formal and guarded, with each side aware that the other now understood more about their relationship than before. The unspoken understanding created a Cold War atmosphere where every action was scrutinized for deeper meaning. Humanity faced its newfound identity with a mixture of pride and profound confusion. The architects had awakened from their long forgetting, but their first conscious act was to question the nature of their own reality. The certainty of their history had vanished, replaced by a past that contradicted everything they thought they knew about themselves. This cognitive dissonance spread through their culture, affecting everything from education systems to personal identity. They were discovering that waking up was only the beginning of a much more difficult process, understanding what they had been before the sleep, and what they should become now that they were awake. The designation architect transformed from an archaeological curiosity to a heavy political reality. It ceased being a historical title found in an ancient database and became a position that nations and factions either claimed or rejected. Some political movements and corporate entities immediately embraced the term, seeing in it a mandate for galactic leadership and a return to what they perceived as humanity's rightful glory. They advocated for rapid technological reclamation and a more assertive stance toward other species, arguing that their inherited legacy demanded a shift from participant to director in galactic affairs. Opposing voices emerged with equal force, warning of the dangers inherent in such a sudden elevation of status. They pointed to the archive's own warnings about the cycle of collapse, arguing that reclaiming power without the wisdom to wield it would only repeat past tragedies. This faction feared the envy and suspicion it would generate among other galactic powers, potentially isolating humanity further or provoking preemptive actions from those who saw their own positions threatened by this shift in the balance of power. The title represented not just opportunity, but a burden that could crush them if mishandled. Earth's governments found themselves unable to form a unified response to the crisis. The Planetary Council fractured along ideological lines, with some members pushing for immediate disclosure and reclamation efforts, while others advocated for continued secrecy and cautious diplomacy. Military leaders disagreed on defense postures, with some calling for strengthened borders and others warning that militarization would confirm other species' worst fears about human ambitions. The debate paralyzed decision-making at the precise moment when clear direction was most needed. The Hegemony Council formalized their demand for an emergency summit, backed by several other major galactic powers. Their communication made clear this was not a request but a requirement, with implications for continued diplomatic relations and trade agreements. They wanted answers to specific questions about what humanity remembered from its past and what intentions it now held regarding its rediscovered legacy. The subtext was clear: they were assessing whether humanity remained a species that needed containment or had become one that required different forms of management. The crew of the Horizons Edge received orders to be released from protective custody and transported to the Central Planetary Council chambers. They arrived under heavy security, moving through corridors filled with officials and advisors who watched them with mixtures of curiosity and apprehension. Their transition from explorers to advisors was sudden and complete, their first-hand experience making them the closest thing to experts on a subject nobody truly understood. Commander Vasquez stood before the assembled Planetary Council, her uniform crisp but her face showing the strain of recent events. She faced leaders who represented billions of people, all waiting to hear her assessment of the discovery that had upended their understanding of reality. She spoke not as a conqueror claiming new territory, but as a witness who had seen evidence of both tragedy and hope. Her report stuck to factual observations from the derelict ship, describing what they had seen and done without editorializing about its meaning. She presented the Council with the fundamental choice she believed humanity faced. The path forward involved either carefully rebuilding their legacy with patience and wisdom, or rushing to reclaim power and potentially repeating the cycle of collapse that had led to the Great Forgetting in the first place. She emphasized that the archive showed their ancestors had chosen restraint over expansion when faced with this same crossroads. The question was whether modern humanity would make the same choice for different reasons, or whether they would allow ambition to override the lessons of their own history. Her testimony concluded with a simple observation that the truth was now known and could not be unknown. The decision was no longer about whether to remember, but about what to do with the memory. The council chambers fell silent as her words settled over the assembled leaders, each person understanding that their choices in the coming days would determine whether the architect's return would bring renewal or repetition of the very disasters their ancestors had sought to avoid. The data downloaded from the archive provided profound revelations, but remained frustratingly incomplete. The fragments they secured answered fundamental questions about humanity's past, while raising even more significant ones about its future. Each file contained gaps and references to information they hadn't captured, creating a puzzle with missing pieces that changed the picture's meaning. The science team continued analyzing what they had, but the limitations of their emergency extraction became increasingly apparent as they attempted to build a complete understanding from partial data. Specific details about the individuals behind the architect designation remained absent from their recovered files. They had the title but no names, the decisions but not the decision-makers. The archive showed the what and when of humanity's golden age but not the who, the actual people who had made the choice to reset their civilization. Were they elected leaders, scientific councils, or some form of collective decision-making body? The absence of personal stories made the history feel abstract, a narrative without protagonists to humanize its extraordinary events. The nature of the catastrophe that prompted the Great Forgetting remained equally unclear. The archive referenced a cycle of collapse that affected advanced civilizations, but provided no specifics about what form this took for humanity. Was it technological disaster, societal breakdown, external threat, or some combination of factors? The lack of details about the actual crisis made it difficult to assess whether the quarantine solution remained relevant to current circumstances or addressed dangers that no longer existed. The reasoning behind choosing quarantine, as the solution presented another significant gap in their understanding. The archive indicated it was a protective measure, but didn't specify what exactly humanity needed protection from. Were they protecting other species from human capabilities, protecting humanity from external threats, or protecting both from some mutual danger? The quarantine's purpose remained ambiguous, making it impossible to determine whether the conditions that justified it still applied in the present galactic environment. The possibility of other caches or derelicts became a subject of intense speculation among analysts. If one archive existed, others might be hidden throughout the galaxy, each containing different pieces of the complete picture. Their discovery might have triggered only the first of many such revelations, with additional information waiting to be found in other locations. This suggested the journey to reclaim humanity's past might require searching places they hadn't yet considered or even knew existed. The derelict's lack of interactive intelligence presented another mystery. The archive functioned as a sophisticated playback system, but showed no signs of conscious awareness or adaptive response beyond its programmed interfaces. If the architects had created such advanced technology, why hadn't they included an AI capable of explaining their decisions and providing guidance? The silence where one might expect a guiding intelligence felt intentional, suggesting the architects wanted humanity to interpret their legacy without direct influence. The true consciousness behind the archive remained absent, its motives and ultimate purposes unclear. The decisions reflected in the data showed profound wisdom and foresight, but the thinking behind those decisions remained inaccessible. Without understanding the architects' deeper motivations and concerns, modern humanity risked misinterpreting their legacy and repeating the mistakes that had necessitated the reset in the first place. The crew's discovery represented not an end to the mystery, but a beginning. They had turned the first page of a history book whose remaining pages were scattered across the galaxy. Each answer they had found came with new questions, each revelation opening pathways to deeper uncertainties. The process of understanding would require not just studying what they had recovered, but seeking what they had missed. This journey to find the remaining pieces would define the next age of galactic civilization. The search would take humanity beyond its current boundaries, both physical and conceptual, as they pursued truths hidden in unknown regions of space and aspects of their own nature. How they conducted this search, with wisdom or arrogance, caution or recklessness, would determine whether they successfully reclaimed their legacy or doomed themselves to repeat its abandonment. Humanity's position had shifted fundamentally. They were no longer at the galaxy's edge, either geographically or culturally. They stood at the center of a mystery that encompassed their entire species and its place in cosmic history. The answers they sought would change not just their understanding of the past, but their trajectory into the future, making every step forward a decision about what kind of architects they would choose to become. The Horizon's Edge discovery proves history remains unwritten until its missing chapters are recovered. Humanity stood at the edge of understanding, holding fragments of a past that redefined their entire existence. The greatest secrets weren't waiting in unexplored space, but buried deep within forgotten time. Now the question remains, should this knowledge be used to reclaim lost glory or serve as a warning against repeating past mistakes? The choice will determine whether civilizations rise from understanding or fall from ambition. Share your thoughts on humanity's path forward in the comments below.